So there are a bunch of benefits that arise out of open space.
Open space on its own has incredible benefits for communities that are nearby.
The value of open space from an economic standpoint is real and it's measurable.
It's a huge economic benefit for flood protection, flood damage, for cleaning our water. Birdwatching alone is a multi-billion-dollar industry across the United States.
Open space leads to a cleaner and more sustainable source of fresh water for humans and wildlife.
It's been quantified for economic value, for tourism, recreation, how it affects health and well-being.
By protecting open space, we are able to connect to something larger than ourselves.
For a transitory enchanted moment, man must have held his breath in the presence of this continent. F. Scott Fitzgerald. Before Europeans ever came ashore in the New World, ancient forests stretched in an unbroken expanse from the Mississippi to the Atlantic Ocean, from northern Canada to Florida. In the west, vast open prairies were bounded by great stands of majestic forests in the Rockies and along the Pacific coast. The native tribes of North America had been living in harmony in these forests and in these open places for thousands of years before Jamestown and Plymouth were settled. Just 400 years later, though, that landscape is a distant memory. In contrast to how the indigenous people regarded this continent, the newcomers saw it quite differently. To them, this new world seemed like an infinitely vast stretch of land with inexhaustible resources to be exploited. That mindset of seeing nature as a limitless provider blinds us to our role in its degradation. Our modern concerns and distractions, as well as our myopic, locally focused vision, prevents us from seeing the uninterrupted loss of the land just beyond the horizon. In the face of this challenge, conservancies and land trusts race to save as much of our natural heritage as possible. However, they're hamstrung by limited funding and a lack of public awareness and resolve. Providing answers to the question of why we should protect open space is a critical starting point for the effort to increase both awareness and resources to save what's left. Public recreation and aesthetics should not be the only reasons for saving our remaining open lands. There are important water quality, environmental, economic, and quality of life reasons too. And of course, there is our responsibility to posterity.
There are many reasons to pursue the protection of open space.
So they run the gamut from value to people and value to the environment.
It also has economic savings for the communities that they're part of.
Studies have shown over and over again that open space actually contributes to property values in surrounding areas. People want to be by green space.
Protected open space boosts the value of houses, properties essentially that are near the open space.
Proximity of trails or open space increases in value about average of $10,000.
The average increase in the value of a property, if it was adjacent to open space, was $10,000. So an individual property was going to be worth on average $10,000 more.
Open space, in theory, is land that does not have to provide services to humans in the sense of being used as a source of business or being a source of growing food and so on and so forth. It's space that actually can be allowed to revert to its natural state.
In many ways, open space is an economic driver. It contributes to and benefits the economy.
For the folks right around there, that means they don't have to bear the burden of having the congestion on their streets increased, or having more air pollution from the cars, or from hearing the cars. So all those are benefits that people right around the open space will enjoy.
We are facing, as many of us know, an epidemic of obesity and attention deficit disorder.
Open space certainly sustains people's health.
People who go outside and stretch their legs are healthier than people who don't generally.
What nature provides that is the best medicine.
And that health translates into a couple of economic benefits.
There's an opportunity here to mitigate that just by having open space in your community.
One is that, well, they're healthier, so they don't go to the doctor as often. They have fewer medical issues overall. And second, they lose fewer days of work.
Communities save later on in terms of lower medical costs.
Open space is really critical for young people as they grow up to have that ability to explore and get outdoors and enjoy nature, but also to fully utilize all their senses.
There's a cost of community services analysis that we do, which basically shows for residential is the most expensive development. It's $1.04 in the red for every dollar spent. And that's because usually with residential development you have a need for schools, you've got your emergency services, you've got road work. So all of those take from the tax base. So we're paying for the residential development.
It's obvious why places like Yosemite have been protected. More difficult is to see the big picture and to value protecting less grandiose places. For the country that in 1872 created the world's first national park, one would think that this is an achievable goal.
We can't think just about the wild, remote places, but we also have to think about creating the open spaces in the communities in which we live on a daily basis.
I think that was one of the other messages of Aldo Leopold in Sand County Almanac, is that in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our backyards, it is all land that is worthy of our care and concern.
It's all important. Every bit of green space, there are pockets. One of the concepts we're dealing with now, looking at in Philadelphia, is helping develop pocket parks and schoolyard habitat areas. These little pieces are important. These are where kids can connect with nature.
In addition to property value reasons, there are ecological reasons.
Streams and rivers are interconnected systems. What happens in the headwaters cascades down to the lower parts of the river and either causes positive or negative effects.
Open space is very important to help clean our water and clean our air too.
It should not be a source of either point or non-point source pollutants. And in fact, not only is it not a source of pollution, but it can be a remedy, because the open space can actually provide a buffer, an area of land between human activity and what we're trying to protect, whether it be a stream or a reservoir or something like that.
But it also filters out nitrates and phosphates and other chemicals, because the plants are going to absorb this stuff and clean it out of the environment, help it break down more.
For example, New York City gets its waters from the Catskill Mountains in upstate New York, and New York City is one of the largest landowners up there. They're buying up land that's in their watershed so that it doesn't get dirtied, so that when it comes down to the city, it's relatively clean.
The cost that we avoid having to pay as the result of having cleaner water, of having less stormwater than we do, even though that's an issue, that the open space that's already in place and already protected is already providing that level of benefits on an annual basis.
There's been a lot of research around the the great critical need for open space as it relates to flooding.
And we know from our studies and other people's studies that a forested landscape is much better able to infiltrate rainwater and therefore prevent surface runoff from causing downstream flooding. And so open space leads to less soil compaction, better water infiltration, and less surface runoff, which in turn helps mitigate downstream flooding.
When we have a healthy environment and the wildlife is surviving, the trees and plants are all there, the plants produce oxygen. I don't know about you, but I sure like to breathe oxygen. It's good stuff to have around. When the animals are doing well, it's a symbol for all of us and a very strong sign that our environment is healthy for us too. Habitat, of course, is food and water and shelter and space that all living creatures need to survive.
That's why we do what we call conservation corridors. We make sure that when we preserve land that we know that in the future there's other land available contiguous or will be available or that we'll keep pursuing so that we make this contiguous corridors of open space to avoid fragmentation of habitat, to allow for migration patterns.
Wildlife need those large expanses so that we're keeping ecosystems intact and that you have the systems functioning that are needed. And wildlife also needs large expanses because they need to be able to move from one habitat to another, and this is why wildlife corridors are important.
We've got a mosaic of different types of land uses across the landscape.
Open space primarily for sports, soccer fields and that kind of thing. It may have some benefit for retaining water in storm events, but it's really not going to have much wildlife habitat value.
When you've got pieces of parcels of land that are developed and other parcels that are protected, but they're not contiguous, then you end up with habitat that has diminished in size over time. In many cases, what that can cause is a habitat that no longer supports the different animals, creatures, butterflies, mammals that exist there.
Proponents of development and economic progress point to the parks, refuges, and wildernesses which are added every so often to the various divisions of the U.S. Interior Department as proof that no crisis exists. Despite the accelerating pace of open space loss, they see no problem. But the view from 30,000 feet masks simple realities like the unsustainability of living in deserts, or the fact that our remaining open space is being lost exponentially. In the past 30 years alone, at least 34 million acres in the United States have been lost permanently to development. The sheer size of our population, too, is another root cause of the rapidly disappearing remnants of this continent's aboriginal beauty.
I'd love to see, and I pose this question, can we have progress without growth?
We have what's called a carrying capacity. We have a certain number of certain amount of land and resources, and we cannot grow exponentially forever. We're going to have to start decelerating our growth. And the question is, are we going to exceed our carrying capacity and experience a big crash, or whether we're going to kind of slowly taper off and reach our carrying capacity?
When you concentrate human populations, you very quickly exceed the capacity of the land to absorb the use and the waste of materials that are being used on the landscape. And so we very quickly exceed the capacity to, for example, process organic waste.
To use the resources that the land provides and to leave nothing behind, it's basically slow and sure suicide. We have always relied on the land. We've always relied on the land and the water to survive. If we extract all there is from it, then we will not be able to survive.
it's all about saving dirt. As one of our past directors once said, that's the bottom line. We have to save the dirt because it's the dirt that supports all the living creatures that grow on top of it.
We need to get people to see themselves as part of something larger. So to see humans not as the conqueror or a conqueror of nature, but instead a member, a plain member, a citizen of the natural community.
We've got to reconnect people. Simple things like community gardens, pocket parks, schoolyard habitats are ways that kids can grow up seeing that connection to Mother Earth.
We have a sustainable demonstration site where we have beekeeping and permaculture, including a microremediation where we've actually cleaned some DDT. It was donated to us by a mushroom family, and we cleaned DDT from the soils using oyster mushroom strata. So we have that, so people can come and learn about sustainability or homesteading with composting and cottage gardens. And
it's important to create this nearby nature initiative where people understand that nature is all around them. It could be, off their balcony or porch. It could be just outside on the street by a tree. And educating folks, in particular when they're young, about using all their senses to experience and enjoy nature, and using that as a stepping stone to get them to care about places that are tough to access, or maybe places that are far away like a Yosemite or Yellowstone.
We've been so separated by urbanization that we fail to understand sometimes that we're part of that ecosystem. We're not separate from it. We should be stewards of the resources because this little planet is all we have. I think back to the early 70s and the start of Earth Day and the environmental movement when I was taking my first ecology classes, and the whole concept of Spaceship Earth came out. And the first Apollo missions that went to the moon and took pictures back of a little blue ball floating in space. I remember the Sierra Club had a t-shirt that showed that little blue ball from space called Planet Earth, and underneath it just said, there's no place else to go. To me, that was really powerful.
It should not take a revolution in our thinking to see that our relentless taking from the environment is not just a threat to the view from our back porches. Open space loss is having a profound effect on the planet's capacity to support us. But underlying causes like population pressure and a lack of concern for the environment will remain until we as a species see that we are a part of nature, not apart from it. But while we dally, searching for a sustainable way to live on Earth, our posterity is depending on the thousands of conservation groups which are working to leave something for them.